Welcome back to episode 2 of the Pre-Match Pint, a podcast brought to you by Dan Lockwood, Callum Ison and Luke James. On today's episode, we're going to be breaking down this week's action from across the Premier League and indulging in some Euro 2020 hot takes with a year to go until the tournament kicks off. Elsewhere in the world of sport, Formula 1 has agreed to launch an equality and diversity task force. Novak Djokovic's Adria Tour has ended in tears. Several players and officials have tested positive for COVID-19. And Marcus Rashford has forced the government into a spectacular U-turn. It has been quite the week in sport, Callum. What has caught your attention over the past 7 days?
Well, obviously, if you guys follow us on Twitter at the Pre-Match Pint pod, one of the things we've been tweeting about this week is Marcus Rashford, who has been on everybody's lips for what he has done outside the world of sport during his time off during coronavirus. So obviously, he made the British government perform a U-turn on giving kids meals throughout the summer as the COVID-19 carries on. And this is something that's caught my attention. And it shows, I think, that as a footballer and as sportsmen, they can actually do a lot more than just sport. So it's something I hope going forward, a lot more players do actually do.
To you, Dan, what's kind of caught your attention over the past week?
Yeah, I mean, like Callum said, obviously the Marcus Rashford saga, if you will, is sort of the one that's pulled the most attention to football, even sort of outside of football coming back. But of course, watching all the Premier League games and results fly in, that's been sort of the best part of the past week. Seeing all of our favourite players and teams battling it out again.
For sure, and of course for some teams upon the return of the Premier League, it's not been quite such a joyous occasion. Although we started off on evening with Aston Villa 0, Sheffield United 0, which is perhaps kind of the most kind of boring scoreline you could have. However, this was a game laced with controversy. Of course, before half time, the Aston Villa goalkeeper was fell into his own net with the ball in his clutches. The goal line technology fouled. Hawkeye issued an apology after the match, and the game finished 0-0. Callum, what did you make of kind of the goal line saga from Villa versus Sheffield United?
To be honest, I found it baffling that it just wasn't given, because I think anybody watching the game could clearly see that it went in. So it just doesn't make sense that, first of all, goal line technology hasn't given it. Secondly, the ref and the linesman haven't been able to see it themselves whilst on the pitch. And thirdly, that VAR wasn't there to review it. I don't understand why. I mean, we've spoken all season about VAR, and it just seems the first game back to speak about it just seems very fitting. But yeah, the fact that hasn't been referred to a VAR assistant, in my eyes, even though it might not be in the rules, is a bit odd.
So, Dan, what did you make of that? Because, of course, this is a result that could have huge ramifications at both ends of the table, because if Sheffield United had won that game, would have given them a couple more points in the fight to kind of stay in contention with the Champions League spots. And, of course, down the other end of the table, it's a huge point for Aston Villa, which perhaps kind of maybe they didn't even deserve, looking at kind of the flow of the game and the fact that they had a goal that clearly should have been given. What did you make of the whole kind of event happening while it took place?
Yeah, so like Callum said, really, it's not really, it is a bit confusing as to how nobody sort of picked it up with the referee and the linesman sort of with their own eyes. It wasn't really a close-cut decision. It was quite far over the line. I mean, everyone watching on TV could sort of see that it had gone over. And especially as for Hawkeye to sort of foul and then them still not to take VAR and use it to its full advantage, it is a bit confusing as to why they didn't do that. And like you said, it could have massive sort of ramifications for both sides, especially to other teams as well, with Villa sort of fighting for survival. That could be an important point with the teams above them, seeing as it is so close down at the bottom end of the table.
You know, what's confusing about it as well is the fact Nyland's face was so blatantly guilty. Like, you could literally see it on his face that he knew it was a goal. Everybody on the pitch, apart from the ref, knew it was a goal. So it just doesn't make sense to me that no one actually thought, God, there's something strange going on here.
Definitely.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And if you kind of look at the statement that Hawkeye issued after the game, it says, during the first half of Aston Villa versus Sheffield United match at Villa Park, there was a goal line incident where the ball was carried over the line by Aston Villa goalkeeper number 25, Nyland. The match officials did not receive a signal to the watch nor earpiece as per the goal decision system protocol. The 7 cameras located in the stands around the goal area were significantly occluded by the goalkeeper, defender, and goalpost. This level of occlusion has never been seen before in over 9,000 matches that the Hawkeye goal line technology system has been in operation. The system was tested and proved functional prior to the start of the match in accordance with the IFAB laws of the game and confirmed as working by the match officials. This system has remained functional throughout. Hawkeye apologises to the Premier League, Sheffield United, and everyone affected by the incident. It's just really a farcical situation that this has happened. And what I would say from a referee's perspective, I have a lot of sympathy, and you won't often hear me say this, a lot of sympathy for Michael Oliver and kind of the on-pitch officials, the linesman, the fourth official, and so on and so on, because it really isn't up to them in a way, because of course if you've been given this technology that you're told is foolproof and is going to work all the time and that you can trust it, no referee in their right mind, think about it the other way, if there was a marginal decision and the watch didn't go off and the referee was convinced that the ball had gone over the line, it turned out that the ball hadn't gone over the line, and then had given the goal and Aston Villa had lost the game 1-0 and they got relegated as a result of a goal that never happened, that would be a catastrophe for the Premier League and for the referee. So kind of from the referee's perspective, you've got to kind of stick with the technology. And in terms of how the officiating worked, it's not down to the on-pitch referee to refer to the video assistant referee either. It's down to VAR to be like, we need to take a look at this. So I thought people who criticised Michael Oliver were a bit harsh, because no sane referee would have ever overruled his kind of watch, for want of a better word. And the statement as well that Hawkeye released was quite farcical by saying kind of, we've never seen this level of occlusion. And of course, the cameras that they use aren't the same cameras as the broadcast cameras. That's important to remember. But obviously, the video assistant referee does see the broadcast cameras and should have been able to see that the ball clearly went over the line. So yeah, I think probably after the season's finished, we'll see a big statement from the FA about what they're going to do about that decision and how they're going to kind of correct that in the future. But beyond the goal line incident, not too much to talk about from Aston Villa, Sheffield United, really.
I think this kind of leading into the other one that Sheffield United obviously played this weekend against Newcastle. This post-season break kind of seems to have had a massive effect on Sheffield United. They don't seem to be the same team they were before the break, which could be a massive issue for them, obviously hoping to push on towards the Champions League spot. But they definitely haven't looked like the same side at all. But that might just be me. What do you guys think?
No, yeah, I mean, they haven't sort of hit the ground running from where they left off. And it does sort of look like sort of out of the past couple of games that they've played this weekend and the one on Wednesday night, it doesn't really seem like they are the same sort of team. So I do understand what you mean. But I suppose it is going to take a couple of teams a little bit longer to sort of get started and sort of hit the ground running with results. But we'll sort of see it over the coming weeks. I know we've not got that many games left, but there's still enough for them to sort of rectify the drop points that they've had and keep pushing on for that top four.
This was a pretty bad week for Sheffield United if you look at the table. So, of course, they started off, I think, in 6th or 5th position. They're now down in 7th after 30 games. They're on 44 points with a +2 goal difference. That puts them now behind Manchester United, who are in 5th on 46 points, and behind Wolves, who are in 6th with 46 points. And I think the issue that Sheffield United will have is that they've lost a lot of that momentum. And prior to the break, you didn't see a lot of kind of mistakes from Sheffield United. I think you probably saw an unreasonable amount of kind of performance. So, for instance, there was a season when West Ham left Upton Park, where West Ham massively outscored their expected goals. And then the following season, everyone was like, why aren't we scoring as many goals? And it was because the season before, West Ham scored basically everything. The ball just flew into the net. And I think we're going to see that a little bit kind of in terms of mistakes from Sheffield United. A couple of their goals against Newcastle, even though they were down to 10 men, were just kind of frankly Sunday League style kind of missing the ball with both of your feet kind of mistakes. So going forward, I think Sheffield United will be okay. They'll start to pick up more points, but it is going to take them a while. The other team that I find quite interesting, though, is that's a huge result for Newcastle, the 3-0 win on Sunday afternoon, which now puts them onto 38 points, which, good news for Arsenal fans, you're only 2 points clear of Steve Bruce's Newcastle United, which ceases to amaze. But Steve Bruce, and there was an interesting quote on the BBC earlier. Someone said, I can't remember which pundit, someone said that Newcastle United have been better under Steve Bruce than Rafa Benitez. What do you make of that, and how good a job has Steve Bruce done at Newcastle United?
To be honest, I can't actually say I disagree. I know that hurts me, obviously, as a Liverpool fan. I've got a massive spot for Rafa in my heart. But yeah, Steve Bruce has just completely defied expectations. Like, Newcastle were nearly odds-on favourites to go down at the start of the season. And it's just ridiculous that they've escaped that relegation battle so early and no one's even putting them in that discussion. And to be honest, they're doing it on obviously a shoestring budget. And if you look at some of the players they've had, obviously Joe Linton scored this weekend, but obviously it's only his second ever Premier League goal and that for being one of their biggest ever signings is pretty worrying. It's pretty amazing what he's done with that team, and it's not been completely defensive football. In some ways, it's actually been quite nice football. Most of the time, they're getting forward with the ball, and I think quite a lot of that. And I'm going to a little bit of a humble brag here after last week when I picked him out. Alan Saint-Maximin, again, awesome this weekend. He just every week seems to just improve, and he's a player I think will probably be on a lot of people's books if he carries on performing like that.
I think there's a lot to say as well, because Newcastle, if you look at their squad, are distinctly average. They have a very average team. They play very kind of average football. They play basically the default style of football in this country. They sit quite deep. They like to get the ball out to the pacey guy. It's very kind of like simplistic and very, very simple. And I don't say that as a means of criticism or a kind of a way of kind of belittling what they've achieved this year. It just goes to show that teams like, and again, I throw Crystal Palace in this category as well, Crystal Palace, Newcastle United, if they have a game plan and you stick to that game plan and all of your players are kind of reading from the same hymn sheet, it really does work for you. And of course, Joe Linton scored, I think, Newcastle's second or third goal, perhaps first. I'm not actually sure which goal. I don't know why I said that. And he received a lot of criticism this year about kind of the fact that he hasn't scored enough and he's been pretty hapless in front of goal. But someone like Joe Linton as well produces a lot for his team off the ball, does a lot of pressing, runs into the channels a lot. And I think if you look at Newcastle, yeah, they spent a lot of money on Joe Linton, which at the time and continues to be quite a kind of weird decision. Game, they won't mind that, kind of above them. The teams around them, Arsenal in 10th place on 40 points. Burnley, although they've played a game less against Man City, that is tonight, again, are on 39 points. Everton are on 38 points. And then behind them, Southampton 37, Brighton 32. So this is a Newcastle team that for the first time in a long time get to look up the table than down the table, which I think credit to Steve Bruce, because a lot of people, and kind of myself included, ridiculed bringing in Steve Bruce from where I think it was at Hull or whoever it was in the Championship. But he really has delivered. Dan, what else kind of stood out to you this weekend?
Well, obviously in regards to Newcastle, they are starting to play some decent football, which sort of goes against what we've seen of Steve Bruce in the past. Sort of stepping away from that, we have got to look at sort of the Arsenal's form has been awful, to say the least. I mean, against Man City, I mean, it didn't help that we had David Luiz give away a penalty and get sent off. But we weren't performing up until that point anyway. So it was always going to be a difficult game to win, especially with our defence. I mean, it was unfortunate to lose Granit Xhaka and Pablo Mari so early on in the game through injuries. And then you'd expect them to pick it up again for Brighton, and it didn't really happen. I mean, we played some good football. I mean, Bukayo Saka was very impressive, sort of playing in that left centre mid role. instead of the usual sort of left back, left wing role that he has been playing. I mean, as well as that, Pepe scored a brilliant goal, and Holding wasn't too bad at the back considering it's his first proper game in a long while. But I mean, there's a lot of things that they need to sort of step up with. I mean, just the fact that we're in the same conversation as Newcastle is a bit embarrassing as an Arsenal fan, seeing us down that far down the table. And unless something changes, whether that be tactics or personnel, it's going to be really difficult to pick up form again.
What do you make of of course, Arsenal had 2 games this week, one of which against a team that really should have probably been beaten comfortably. What do you make of the decision to leave £350,000 per week Mesut Ozil on the bench, or not even in the matchday squad, rather, for both of those games?
Yeah, I mean, it just, I don't understand it. I mean, Ozil is not the player that he was, but you'd sort of expect, having been at his best whilst he was playing with Mikel Arteta, you would sort of expect them to sort of give him more of a chance now. I would have thought Arteta would be bringing him in. I mean, there's been a lot of rumours about what he's been doing off the pitch and all of this, but no, we don't know whether any of that is true or not. But I mean, seeing us waste that amount of money on a player who isn't really of top quality anymore, and he doesn't really seem to be getting back any of the form that he's shown in previous years. It does seem a strange one to sort of be leading him out completely, though. That can make an impact when he's on his day. I mean, we've seen it time and time again. He is a good player, but especially with the 5 substitutions now as well, it's surprising to not even see him be taken into account for any of that either. It is a strange one, but hopefully he will sort of get his chance to just show what he can do over the next few weeks.
The thing with Arsenal as well, which is kind of concerning and kind of quite intriguing at the same time, is you've got a lot of players, and there's been quite a sensational amount of mismanagement of Arsenal when it comes to players reaching the end of their contracts and just being able to wind them down. And I think the season after Ozil signed his contract, he's been on a downward trajectory ever since. And I think Arsenal going forward, this transfer window is going to be absolutely massive with regards to their future, because if they don't make the right signings, you could see Arsenal really start to slip back into the midfield, into the mid-table, which, considering Arsenal, the size of the club they are, the quality of the players they've previously had, the quality of players they've sold, and of course, we shouldn't forget, this is all within the context of what, at the start of this decade, millennium rather, Arsenal moved stadiums on the promise that it would deliver them kind of next level football. And of course, we've seen similar things with a certain East London club more recently. But this is, again, Arsenal really not delivering on the promises that they made to their fans. Of course, in the game against Brighton, which finished 2-1 to Brighton and Hove Albion, which was a huge result for them at the bottom of the table. And it's just struck me looking at the table, Brighton have a very, very good goal difference in comparison to the teams around them. Anyway, I digress. Of course, the big moment in the game and kind of the big flare point after the match was the injury to Bernd Leno. What did you make of the collision between Leno and Maupay, Callum?
I can obviously see why Arsenal players and fans were angry about it. Obviously, Bernd Leno arguably is Arsenal's best player and probably the most influential at times. Obviously, kept them in the game against Manchester City pretty much single-handedly. But I don't think there was any malice in Maupay going up for the ball. I think it was a little bit late, but I don't think he did it intentionally to injure him. I think it's just one of them things sometimes strikers do just to try and get in the keeper's head a little bit and just like kind of scare them from coming out of their box. Obviously, I don't think you're going to scare Bernd Leno into not coming out and rushing you. But yeah, I think Maupay made an interesting point about the players needing a bit more humility after the game. And I kind of agree with him because obviously what Guendouzi did after the game, I don't think you can condone that, like grabbing Maupay by the throat, I think was a little bit of an overreaction. I know there was the emotions of the loss as well, but I do think it was a bit of an odd decision from Guendouzi, and I don't think the challenge actually warranted that kind of reaction.
Dan, what did you make of the incident?
No, I mean, I do have to agree. I don't think it was malicious. I don't think it was done with the intent of injuring him. I mean, it wasn't a vicious tackle or anything like that. It was just unnecessary, really. Um, I mean, you're always told challenge for the ball, but I mean, it was a bit late, and I do think it was unnecessary. But I don't think it was meant to injure Leno, as I've seen some Arsenal fans say. I don't believe that was the case. But like Callum said, Leno has been one of our best players this year, so we are gonna miss him quite a lot, especially as we're trying to sort of get our form back, move up the table. But it's gonna make it difficult for us to do that. In regards to Guendouzi, I mean, he's one of them players that you hate him if he's playing against you. If he plays for you, I think you like it that he is showing some sort of fight, even though it is sort of in the wrong way. If you look back to the years, sort of with Vieira, Henry, Lehmann, players like that, I think they would have sort of had their piece there and then as the challenge happened. Whereas doing it after the game, it does seem a bit like it was just done because we lost, and he was a bit annoyed about that as well. But I mean, if he doesn't get a ban after this, it's going to be very surprising. But I mean, we will miss him. I mean, he's a good player. I do like Guendouzi. I do think he's got a lot to offer. But we will miss him if he does end up getting a ban for grabbing Morpro by the throat. And yeah, it was an odd decision. But it'll be interesting to see what happens.
I agree with that as well. And again, it was just such a bizarre way to finish the match, because if you've got something to say, you say it at the time. And again, kind of if we compare the Premier League to Sunday League, which again is a lazy cliche in itself, but if you're going to stick up for your teammate, you do it at the time. You don't wait until full time, at which point you've lost and you look like a bit of a mug, to kind of say your piece. And again, you're going to have to be reprimanded because, of course, given all of the social distancing policies that the Premier League has in place and all this kind of thing, the fact that they're not doing post-match handshakes, it's just inconceivable in this time to think that a player could get away with attempting to strangle an opponent and not be given some form of suspension. And it's not funny, but at the same time, it kind of is, because it's just so utterly ridiculous. Another Arsenal midfielder that I kind of wanted to touch upon, mainly because of a quote about him on kind of Sky Sports yesterday, Granit Xhaka. He doesn't pass particularly well, he doesn't shoot particularly well, he doesn't get assists, and he gets a lot of yellow cards. That was the gist of the analysis after the game. Is Granit Xhaka a player who belongs at a club like Arsenal?
I personally, I do like Granit Xhaka. I do feel like we aren't as good of a team without him. Whether that means that we've just not got enough decent players and he could be easily replaced with someone better, I don't know. But at the minute, I do feel like he definitely has a future with Arsenal. I mean, he's not been sort of the golden boy. I mean, he's given the captaincy and lost it after a couple of weeks. I mean, he's had a lot of controversy during his time, but during them periods where he was sort of out of the team, we did miss him, and I do think that we do need him there until we do manage to find a replacement for him. But I mean, he does have something to offer, and whether that is, I know that's not assists or many goals, but we do miss him when he's not there.
Kind of going off what you said about the controversy, I find it absolutely wild that he's been able to rebuild his Arsenal career after walking off the pitch during that, I can't remember who it is against, and ushering to the fans when they was abusing him once he'd been subbed off. And this kind of is, I think, partly due to Arsenal not being at their best, because I feel like if Arsenal were playing good football, were pushing towards the top of the league, and Granit Xhaka hadn't got back in that side, he wouldn't have ever played for Arsenal again. But sheerly because how bad Arsenal's midfield is, Granit Xhaka's been given a second chance, and I don't actually think he should have, because I don't think anyone should disrespect the badge or the club in the way that he did.
No, yeah, I mean, I do have to agree with that. I mean, if we was sort of the team of sort of a decade ago, 15 years ago, there's no chance that would have. I don't even think it would have happened. I think The players back then, they sort of had a bit of respect for the club and the fans. I do understand why Granit Xhaka did what he did. I mean, he was his wife, and that was getting messages from the fans, and that is like, it's not acceptable. But neither is sort of disrespecting them openly, sort of in the stadium and on TV. I mean, it was out there for all the world to see, and it doesn't really give a good. It doesn't really show a lot of discipline in the players, and even the coach to sort of bring him back into the fold and give him some playing time again. But I do think you are right. If we did have a better midfield, there's no way he'd be near the starting 11, let alone the bench. Really, I don't think. But it'll be interesting to see what happens, because I do feel like there must be something about Granit Xhaka for both Unai Emery, Wenger and Arteta to keep playing him even after the controversy. So they must see something in him that sort of maybe not everyone does, sort of especially pundits who seem to have a lot of criticism of him over the past few months.
We've had quite a kind of doom and kind of gloom perspective on Arsenal in this discussion. Although they sit in 10th position in the table, they are only 6 points behind Manchester United in 5th. Is there any chance that Arsenal will still qualify for either the Champions League or Europa League next season?
I can't see them qualifying for the Champions League, purely because I think the teams above them have far better quality. But I think the thing that with Arsenal is that they are producing a lot of young talent, and there's a lot of people that I'm actually really excited by in that team. Bukayo Saka being one, Eddie Nketiah also being another. So I do think if they start to use that talent in the correct ways, they can push on towards the Europa League spot. And I don't think that would be an awful season for Arsenal, given obviously Unai Emery leaving midway through and Arteta trying to rebuild the club. I think it wouldn't be the worst scenario for them to be left in.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see us qualifying for Champions League. I can't see the teams above us dropping that many points in the games that they've got left. I mean, we are only a few points off of the Europa League spots, but I think that says more about how sort of out of the top 2 and 3, how poor the other teams have been sort of all season. The fact that a team like Arsenal, the way they've been playing, are still sort of in contention. They shouldn't be anywhere near it, really. But I think it's sort of the form of the other teams above them that has sort of allowed them to stay in the mix. When really in a regular season where maybe the teams above them were performing to their best level, they wouldn't have a chance. They would have been discounted a long time ago.
The saving grace for Arsenal, though, is if kind of the slump in Arsenal stature does continue, is that in a couple of years' times, the UEFA Conference League will be available, something they could perhaps kind of look to qualify for instead, which is always nice to see. Speaking of a team that might be heading in the direction of the conference, West Ham United again lost this weekend. Of course, it was at the London Stadium. West Ham United 0, Wolverhampton Wanderers 2, the goals from Jimenez and Neto. Callum, what did you make of West Ham's performance? What did you make of Wolves' performance? Is there any light at the end of the tunnel for David Moyes' side?
To be honest, I don't think losing to Wolves is actually that bad a result, because obviously Wolves are actually a very good side and play some very attractive football. But I think just the way David Moyes set up his team, it just feels, for a team that needs points to avoid relegation, he's so defensive. Like, he literally doesn't. I don't even think he had a striker on the pitch when he started the game, which to me is just baffling. And especially given supposedly Sebastian Haller was playing really well in the warm-up games. But I think the two players that kind of came on for Wolves, Pedro Neto and Adama Traore, kind of changed the game for Wolves. And I mean, Traore was once again spectacular. He just seems to have pushed on again. And his final third, the delivery for the first goal for Raul Jimenez was a great cross, and it was just inviting a goal. But yeah, for me, I just think West Ham have completely gone about how they're setting up in the wrong way. I think they need to attack games because they've got the quality, especially against the teams they are battling against in relegation. But they're just being too defensive, and that worries me a bit.
And you talk about kind of the West Ham lineup this weekend. It was Fabianski in goal with a back four of Ngakia, Diop, Rice, and Cresswell. In the midfield, we had a double pivot of Mark Noble and Thomas Souček. And then at this point, we venture into the unknown because a lot of people on social media and a lot of people who watched the game weren't kind of too sure which positions these players were actually playing in. So typically, Jared Bowen was on the right-hand side. Pablo Fornals was tending to drift out onto the left. Felipe Anderson, some thought was playing as a striker, some thought he was playing as a number 10, some thought he was kind of playing on the left wing, so that was very odd. And then kind of the main focal point of the attack was Mikel Antonio. And of course, this is an era in the Premier League where clubs and managers can make 5 substitutions. The substitution for West Ham came in the 67th and 83rd minutes. Felipe Anderson was replaced by Manuel Lanzini, and on the 81st minute, Ryan Fredericks replaced Jeremy Ngakia, and Andrew Yarmolenko replaced Pablo Fornals. It wasn't a particularly kind of awe-inspiring performance from West Ham, but as you say, Callum, Traore, who came on after 64 minutes, was kind of spectacular and did a man of the match. What did you make of his performance, Dan?
I mean, Traore, he's really pushed on a lot this year. I mean, when we sort of see him a few years ago, I believe he was with Middlesbrough. He was sort of an all-pace player and didn't really give that much else. But, I mean, in this Wolves side, he really is sort of the focal point of their attack when he is on the pitch. And, I mean, the cross for Jimenez's goal was a good build-up. It was a great cross. And, obviously, Jimenez broke the Wolves goal record for most goals scored by a Wolves player in a single season, which is always good to hear as a Wolves fan. But I mean, Traore, he really has pushed on. And I mean, there is a lot of talk of him going elsewhere. But I can see him sort of sticking around for a little bit longer because I really can't personally see him making that big jump to sort of the levels of Barcelona that have been rumoured to be interested in him.
He's been linked with Liverpool lately. There's been a lot of talk about Liverpool obviously wanting to build this dynasty after obviously the coronavirus. But he is someone I actually love because obviously he started on the bench Wolves, so he's actually a player. So clearly he doesn't really mind sitting on the bench. But also he's got a major impact on games when he comes on. Like there's been many times this season when he's just come on and changed the game for Wolves. So I definitely love him at a bigger club, and I actually think he could make that step up.
What I would say about Traore as well is that at the minute, when you've got 5 substitutions, when you've got games every kind of 3 to 4 days, he's a player that if you bring on in the second half with fresh legs, he's going to absolutely hammer kind of anyone he comes up against. And that's what we saw as well. He was up against, I think, Aaron Cresswell. Cresswell didn't get near Traore throughout the match. And again, I was at the game between West Ham and Wolves at Molineux earlier this year. And the number of times, and this was a feature of Wolves' play this weekend as well, the number of times where a Wolves midfielder or a Wolves kind of central defender would pick up the ball, go into like a deep defensive midfield position and just spray kind of a 30 to 40 yard pass diagonal across the pitch to either winger was just kind of ridiculous the number of times they did it and ridiculous the number of times that West Ham failed to defend against it. And we saw that a lot again. It was passes kind of over from the Wolves' right-hand side over the head of Jeremy Ngakia, and then 2 Wolves players basically double teaming Ngakia to try and kind of win the second ball. Wolves are really effective, and Wolves, of course, have just been so good since they've been promoted. And I think if you look at the table, they stand every chance, especially if Manchester City not fail to qualify, are excluded from the Champions League, have every chance of perhaps making it into Europe's premier competition. On a slightly more doom and gloom perspective, West Ham now sit 3 goals above the relegation zone. This is how the relegation zone looks at the minute. So Norwich, after the defeat this weekend, starting to slip away from them. They are now on 21 points after 30 games. Aston Villa, 30 games, 26 points. All these teams have played 30 games. Bournemouth, 27 points, minus 20 goal difference. And then West Ham, 27 points, minus 17 goal difference. Watford, minus 17 goal difference, 28 points. And then Brighton are up there on 32 points now. Based on West Ham's performance yesterday, do you think they're going to stay in the division?
To be honest, no. And if we kind of look ahead at the fixtures as well, obviously you've got two really, really tough games. Obviously you've got the Tottenham, which is the derby in the midweek, and then you've got Chelsea as well. Neither of them fill me with confidence. I wouldn't be surprised if you lost them. And then, to be honest, looking at the rest of your fixtures, there's only two that I'd say you could win. And I'm not even saying that really with confidence. The only one I'd probably say you should win with confidence is against Norwich. So for me, I think given how you performed and actually looking at the fixtures that you've got coming up, it doesn't fill me with confidence at all.
I agree. And I think if you look at West Ham fixtures, of course, the first games after the restart, we had Wolves this weekend on Tuesday night. West Ham take on Tottenham. And then kind of next week, West Ham host Chelsea at the London Stadium. After that, a couple of kind of easier games coming up for West Ham. They face Newcastle United away, Burnley at home, Norwich away, and Watford at home. Then in the final two games of the season, it's Manchester United at Old Trafford. And then on the last day of the season, Sunday, the 26th of July, West Ham host Aston Villa in what I truly believe will basically be a relegation playoff. I think the team that loses that game is going to be relegated, and I don't have a lot of confidence in David Moyes' side. The question I'd like to throw to you, Dan, is West Ham throughout the game were very kind of on the back foot, very happy for Wolves to keep possession, didn't engage particularly high up the pitch. Do you think that West Ham need to change their approach going forwards if they're going to stand a chance of winning some of these games?
Yeah, I think they've got to. I mean, at the minute, they're not looking likely to stay up. I mean, they've definitely got the quality to go out there and attack teams. So whether it is something that sort of David Moyes is implementing with them sort of sitting back, I think if you start the game sitting back on a team, you're always on the back foot, and you've got to rely on the counter attacks. And I mean, I know you have got some good quality attackers, but they don't seem to be able to bring that ball out and sort of create chances off the back of the counter attack. I do think you need to change your more attacking style, because I don't think you're going to get anywhere sort of sitting back and letting teams come onto you.
A quote that kind of caught my eye on social media after the game came from a Wolves fan who basically said that David Moyes set up for a 2-0 loss and it's the result that he got, so he'll probably be quite happy. And that sentiment is kind of shared by a lot of West Ham fans I've seen. So a lot of people talk about David Moyes kind of in the context of saying that in games where he doesn't expect West Ham to win, he's quite happy to take a 1-0 defeat, a 2-0 defeat, as long as it doesn't kind of worsen West Ham's goal difference. And we saw it a couple of weeks ago when West Ham played against Liverpool, where West Ham sat back for a very, very long time. Liverpool scored, and then West Ham kind of went for it a little bit, and then Liverpool scored again, and it was like, right, okay, 2-0's enough. We'll just kind of sit back and hope for the best. I think West Ham desperately need to score the first goal in the games that really matter. And we talk about West Ham, we talk about the games that really matter. They've got Newcastle United, which before the restart, I genuinely thought was a game that West Ham could win because I thought Newcastle would be on the beach. That doesn't really seem to be happening at the moment. After that, it's Burnley. Again, it's kind of winnable, but it'll be a tough game at the London Stadium. Then a truly massive game, Saturday the 11th of July against Norwich. I think if West Ham lose against Norwich, it's curtains. That's kind of a 3 points that West Ham simply have to win. Are there any players, Callum, in West Ham's squad that perhaps aren't getting the game time you'd expect that need to be restored to the starting lineup?
Someone I find interesting for West Ham, and this is from being over there a few times this season and seasons past, is Arthur Masuaku. And I know he's a little bit hit and miss, but I feel like he has got the talent to play. But I don't think he's a left back. Might be a rogue shout, but I definitely think if you played him in a more advanced position, he could inspire that team a bit more. So he's definitely one of them. And then obviously, I know he's been playing a little bit more recently. Is in Ngakia, the youngster. I first saw him playing against Liverpool, and he was actually really good. He's really impressed me. So he's kind of mental as well. Obviously, yesterday he had a half chance against Wolves, which was a bit worrying, seeing it was one of the only West Ham chances that I actually remember. But he's definitely one that I think you need to tie him down to a contract, because there's a lot of talk about him moving on. And so if you tie him down to a contract and start giving him game time, he could obviously be quite a big influence on your defence.
The last player I kind of wanted to touch upon with West Ham, he's fit, he's ready to go, he's ready to play football again. The return of Jack Wilshere, is that something you'd like to see, Dan?
Yeah, of course. I mean, Jack Wilshere was he never lived up to what he was meant to be. But I feel like when he plays, he gives everything that he's got. I mean, I've not seen him too much for West Ham, but his final season at Arsenal, he wasn't the best player on the pitch, not by a long shot, but he always gave it his best. And I think that is going to be a real benefit for West Ham going forward, sort of in this relegation battle. I think you need players that have got the passion. And I mean, Jack Wilshere is full of experience. I do feel like he needs to be maybe not in the starting 11, but he needs to be coming on early in the game, early enough to get an impact. He's definitely a player that will work for the team, and that's what you need when you're in a relegation battle. You can't have your heads dropping and sort of settling for them 1-0, 2-0 defeats, as you were saying. So if he does start to bring Wilshere on in the coming weeks, it will be interesting to see what effect he has on the squad and whether that's a positive effect.
I think with West Ham, something that David Moyes has to do is pack the midfield. I think West Ham needs to be playing with 3 central midfielders, preferably with Declan Rice back in the midfield as well. Although, in fairness, despite the 2-0 defeat, I think Declan Rice played really, really well in central defence. I think he's a great player. And I don't really understand kind of the abuse that he gets on social media. It's just a bit bizarre. But if we look at West Ham, and there's a lot of discussion continually and permanently about Mark Noble's place in the team. And I'm personally somebody who quite likes Mark Noble. I think that West Ham are a better team with him in the side, even though he's probably not among our best 11 footballers at the club. He's definitely not among the best 11 footballers at the club. But it's very, very obvious if you watch West Ham at the moment that Mark simply does not have the legs, does not have the energy to play a game every 3 days. He doesn't have that in him anymore. So what I'd quite like to see is Noble play one game, Jack Wilshere perhaps start the next one and then be subbed at half-time for someone else. And again, West Ham have got youngsters on the bench who could provide options. You talk about, not a youngster, but I'll address him, Masuaku receives so much stick from West Ham fans for not being able to defend. And I agree, he's terrible defensively. He's absolutely pathetic defensively. He's got no awareness whatsoever. However, if it's a choice of playing Masuaku on the wing or Felipe Anderson on the wing, I'm definitely picking Masuaku at the moment. And again, a couple of other players to talk about with West Ham. Ben Johnson's a good player. He can play at left back or right back, so that would be interesting to see. And again, there's more youngsters on the bench like Xande Silva who could potentially make an impact because, again, David Moyes clearly doesn't have any faith in kind of West Ham's backup strikers. So it just seems somewhat of an odd situation. So yeah, I really do worry about West Ham. Across the Premier League, it's probably time to look at some of the other results. We'll just run through them quickly. Watford won, Leicester City won. I think it'll be good to touch on this game briefly because we saw, I think, my 2 favourite goals of the weekend in this game. Ben Chilwell's strike was, frankly, unbelievable. Callum, walk me through Craig Dawson's equaliser.
Well, what else can you say, really? It's ridiculous that a centre-back has been able to score a 90th minute equaliser, let alone it being an overhead kick. It was kind of Leicester's own making. They failed to deal with a long throw in from Watford and cleared it out for a corner. And from there, it kind of just seemed that Leicester kind of fell apart in the last few minutes. But yeah, that goal was something special and is a massive point for Watford because obviously they're still in that relegation scrap as well.
The only other game that we haven't spoke about on Saturday afternoon was the match between AFC Bournemouth and Crystal Palace, of course, making history in its own right, being the first game broadcast live on the BBC. It was a 2-0 win for Crystal Palace that brings them right up into contention to qualify for Europe, which, again, a fantastic achievement by Roy Hodgson's team. And I think it's testament to the fact that Roy Hodgson has done a really, really good job at Crystal Palace. Luka Milivojevic is someone who always kind of grabs the headlines with Palace, especially when Zaha hasn't got on the score sheet. Do you think Milivojevic is someone who deserves a place at a bigger team, Dan?
The thing is, with him, I can't see a bigger team in England that could really benefit from him. I know he provides a presence in the midfield, and he provides a lot of goals, whether that be from free kicks or from the penalty spot. In England, not necessarily. I just don't think there's too many players too many teams that could utilise him. Whereas I think maybe if he stepped abroad, that could be the place for him to sort of get his chance.
Yeah, with Milivojevic, I think he's one of these players, and I think there's quite a lot of these in the Premier League, that is a player that just suits the system. I don't know. This is kind of something I feel with Jordan Henderson in Liverpool's system as well. They're players that suit that style of football, and I'm not sure they could translate that anywhere else. Obviously, the free kick he scored was unbelievable. It's textbook. It's what you want to teach a youngster. But yeah, for me, Milivojevic, I don't think he can make the step up, and I don't actually think he'd suit many other teams' style of football, because I think Roy Hodgson has and Crystal Palace have just kind of unlocked Milivojevic a bit.
Milivojevic is a player I really like watching, but I think I agree. I think he could make the step up to a team who's competing in the Europa League, and I could see him being a really popular player in Italy. I could see him playing in one of the better teams in France. In terms of making the step up to a team in the top six in the UK, probably less likely. In terms of the other results from the Premier League that we haven't spoken about yet, on Sunday afternoon, we did kind of touch on this briefly earlier. Aston Villa 1, Chelsea 2. That's a good result for Frank Lampard's team. It keeps them in a very, very good spot with regards to qualifying for Europe. And then last but not least, in my opinion, the worst game of the weekend, Everton 0, Liverpool 0. Was this the worst Merseyside derby of all time?
Personally, no. I can't say I really expected anything different. Obviously, Everton haven't won a Merseyside derby since 2010. I think it wouldn't. I think I'm a little bit biased, but I don't think it would have been as bad a game if there was a crowd, because there were quite a few chances. And obviously, I think actually Everton probably could have snatched a game towards the end, but that is down to Dejan Lovren's making. But I don't think it was the worst game I've ever seen out of the Merseyside derbies. I just think, I think given it was the first weekend back, it was built up as like the big centrepiece of the Premier League return. Obviously, there was talk about Liverpool maybe being able to secure the Premier League title there if Arsenal had beaten Man City last week. I think it was just a little bit overhyped, because obviously the past 3 Merseyside derbies on Goodison Park have all been 0-0s, and then the other one was Sadio Mane's last-minute winner. So they haven't been high-scoring games. So I think it was a little bit overhyped for me.
Dan, what did you make of the derby?
I mean, as a neutral, I can't say that I particularly enjoyed watching the game. It was a bit dull at times. But I think with a derby, it's never going to live up to expectations if you don't have the impact of the fans in the stadium. I think even had it been the exact same game, I think you would sort of see from fans' reactions at the games and post-game. I think you'd see a lot more sort of passion. I think being put into the game. I mean, if you had bad challenges, the fans will affect decisions and things like that. But I think a derby behind closed doors, it's never going to live up to expectations. But I've got to agree with you, it was probably the dullest game of the weekend and sort of the Premier League restart in general.
Yeah, I kind of think it was quite dull. I think that was just kind of how Carlo Ancelotti wanted to play the game. I think he knew that if he went for it and attacked us, I think he knew that Liverpool would break them down pretty easily. But I think he kind of sat up, and rightfully so, and obviously got the result in a way that just they were kind of just knocking long balls over the top. And there was a couple of times they actually created really good chances. Richarlison got in behind the back line and probably should have done better with his chance on the half volley. And then obviously once Lovren came on, there was quite a few chances where they were just pumping long balls up over him and quite rightly targeting the weak spot of that team.
I think John Barnes's analysis after the game was really, really accurate and really precise, and I think he got it right. I think if you look at the way that Everton set up, it was very much just to contain Liverpool, and without a crowd to get frustrated at the team for not attacking and for not kind of pressing higher up the pitch and for not kind of trying to take matters into their own hands. I think Everton really organised it well. I think the way they sat back really frustrated Liverpool, and Ancelotti got the result he wanted. And I think the system that Ancelotti plays at Everton is like a 4-4-1-1, isn't it, essentially, with playing off Calvert-Lewin. It works really well for Everton, and I think Ancelotti's a manager, and they kind of compared him to Mourinho as well yesterday. He's a manager who is going to be comfortable just looking at a match and saying, no, I'm not too bothered about how kind of sexy the football is. I just want to get the result that we need, walk away with it. And to be fair to Everton, it's a good result for them. It puts them on 38 points above Newcastle. And again, a win could quite easily take them into the top half in the next match. In terms of Liverpool, what did you make of the front three that started the match? Of course, you had Minamino, Mane and Firmino. Was that the right call from Jurgen Klopp?
Personally, I do think it was the right call, but the two, I think Mane had a good game, and I think he was kind of a manhandled by the Everton defence. They dealt with him well. Seamus Coleman, obviously, with a man-of-match performance. But I think on paper that does work. But there's a problem I have with Minamino is that, and I think this is why he came off at half time, he doesn't stay out wide. He clearly wants to work in a central position. And obviously that is where Bobby Firmino thrives. I don't think Bobby Firmino had a great game yesterday. I actually think quite a lot of the play that went through him broke down. Obviously he could have set it out to the left for Naby Keita, and I think we probably would have scored from that chance. But yeah, my problem with that was that Minamino drifted in towards the centre a lot more than Salah does, and it wasn't providing us with the option to spread the pitch out wide like we normally do, or put someone in behind. Because quite a lot of the time, I think Henderson's good at this, is he'll pick up the ball around the 18-yard box and clip a little ball over the top and get someone running on behind. And there was none of that yesterday, which I found a bit lackluster. And I think that we really struggled to break down the Everton defence with Minamino, Firmino and Mane.
I think when one of your sort of front three is out, as Salah was on the bench, I do think you do miss that. I feel like they work well together, but I'm not sure whether sort of Minamino is the player to sort of step in when one of those is out. That's why I think like missing out on Timo Werner is going to be a big deal for Liverpool, because I can see them sort of stagnating if one of the players does get injured or is out for a long period of time. I can't see them working well with sort of Minamino stepping in. If he was going to make one signing for Liverpool, I think he'd have to get a backup for the front three, because I do feel they really miss each of them if they are out of the matchday squad.
Liverpool's system as well is very much reliant on people playing the roles that the system is built around. So Minamino is a completely different player to Mo Salah. He likes to drift inside. He likes to get into the half spaces. He likes to kind of control the tempo of the game. And if you swap Minamino out for Mo Salah, it changes the dynamic completely, especially with the relationship down the right wing as well. So I agree. I think from a squad building perspective, I think Liverpool do need another player who can get in behind, who is quick, who isn't afraid to dribble at pace. And then that gives them something different. And you look at someone like Minamino as well, who I think will turn out to be a good player. And he was kind of a ridiculously cheap signing, considering how kind of much potential he has and how much quality he showed while he was at RB Salzburg. I just think it was a case of Minamino not being the right fit in that system. If he was playing a number 10 kind of in that game, it would have been a different kind of performance from him. But of course, at the end of the game, Jurgen Klopp did kind of say, well, I plan to make the substitution at halftime anyway. What did you make of Jurgen Klopp's use of substitutions? Do you think he made the most of kind of having the extra subs, or do you think he kind of was just rotating to save players' legs as you approach the end of the season?
I think yesterday is a kind of a bit of an anomaly for Liverpool, because obviously Milner came off injured in the first half. Then we had Matip come off injured as well. So I think a lot of the substitutes we would have made weren't able to come on. But obviously we brought on Origi, who I didn't even know was playing half the time. Didn't make an impact on the game at all. And I actually don't mind Origi. I think he's actually quite good as an impact player. But yeah, I feel like, kind of going off what you're saying about transfers, I feel like one of the problems with Liverpool right now is that teams know what subs they're going to make. So as soon as they see that player warming up, they know how to respond to it. But if they had a player, like obviously you said with Timo Werner, if they sign someone like that, you kind of then get the unexpected factor coming back, which I think we don't use. Like I think using someone maybe like Harvey Elliott, who's actually really impressed Jurgen Klopp this season and has actually gone past the boundaries they set him this year. If we actually used him yesterday, I think it would have been a useful addition because teams wouldn't have known what to expect from him. And I think it could have been a quite interesting experience for him as well.
That kind of wraps up the last week in the Premier League. Of course, looking forwards and looking forward to tonight matches on Tuesday evening. Leicester face Brighton and Hove Albion. After that, it's Tottenham versus West Ham United. On Wednesday evening, you've got Manchester United versus Sheffield United, Newcastle versus Aston Villa, Norwich versus Everton, Wolverhampton Wanderers against AFC Bournemouth. And then the final game of that evening, you have Liverpool versus Crystal Palace. Then to round off the game week on Thursday night, we have Burnley against Watford, Southampton are hosting Arsenal, and Chelsea up against Manchester City at Stamford Bridge. Are there any games that kind of stand out to you as ones that you're looking forward to watching?
I mean, it's definitely got to be the West Ham Tottenham game. That's going to be a pivotal moment in West Ham's season. And I mean, they always seem to perform that little bit better when they are playing against Spurs. So I could see them picking up points based on that alone, but is the factor of having no fans in the stadium going to affect sort of what happens throughout that game? Because I do feel like the fans do have an effect when it is a game such as West Ham versus Spurs. But that's definitely sort of my pick of the game week.
And Callum, what about you? Are there any games that stand out?
For me, I think this will kind of actually be a bit of a weird chat, but I think the Manchester United versus Sheffield United game will actually be quite interesting. I think the game of Manchester United versus Tottenham changed a lot when Paul Pogba came on. Obviously, it was one of the most anticipated subs of the season, obviously getting to see Pogba play with Bruno Fernandes for the first time. And I think they actually operated really well together. I think Pogba looked like a completely different player to how he has the rest of the season. And then I just think that a full-strength Man United team is actually quite exciting. And then obviously there could be quite a lot of goals in that. Obviously Dean Henderson can't play. We have I think it was John Egan got sent off for Sheffield United, so he'll be suspended. So there could be quite a few goals in that for Manchester United.
The game I'm quite looking forward to watching, Wednesday evening, Wolves at home against Bournemouth. The reason I picked that game out as well is because Wolves played pretty good football on Saturday afternoon. Bournemouth are in a lot of trouble and they need to start kind of showing better performances, getting a couple of goals, because they've not scored enough this season. They've not created enough this season. So it's so important for Bournemouth. I don't expect them to win this match, but just like West Ham, they need to show more than they have been, because at the minute, Bournemouth, West Ham, Norwich looking like, in my opinion anyway, the three worst teams in the division. I think I might have asked this on episode 1 of the podcast, but if you had to pick 3 teams to be relegated at this point in the season, which teams would you go for at the moment?
For me, it's Bournemouth, Norwich and West Ham.
And I've got to agree with that as well. It is Bournemouth, Norwich and West Ham. I think that's where I'm gonna predict.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think Bournemouth are in a lot of trouble, and I think West Ham are going to struggle more kind of after the season reaches kind of the later weeks. In a spot of breaking news at the time that we record this podcast, the Japanese Football Association has withdrawn its bid to host the 2023 Women's World Cup. That will now either be hosted jointly by Australia and New Zealand or in Colombia. So that's a little bit of news for you. However, speaking of summer tournaments, to end the show, we wanted to do a little bit of discussion about Euro 2020. I've not done, I was going to say anywhere near enough preparation. I've not done any preparation for this segment. So Callum, what did you have in mind for the show?
Yeah, so something, obviously we would have been in the middle of the Euros right now, and something that's really interesting to probably look at is the England team. Obviously, one of the teams we're talking about as being a really exciting prospect for next season, and there's a lot of change, I reckon, from the last tournament. So obviously the 2018 World Cup. So let's start with a goalkeeper. Who do we think will be England's starting goalkeeper next summer?
I've got to go with, at the moment, based on this season's form, I'd probably go with Dean Henderson. I think that's where we're sort of going to hit the number one at.
Yeah, I definitely go with Dean Henderson as well. I think he's by far and away the best English goalkeeper in the league. And I think the only goalkeeper really comes particularly close to him is a player who's not going to get in the squad anyway, simply because of age. I really, really like Ben Foster. So I think for me, they're the two kind of standout goalkeepers, especially when you look at expected saves, and I think this is someone you'll probably bring up now, Nick Pope, although he's always received a lot of plaudits in terms of expected saves, it's not been a brilliant season for him. So yeah, I do agree. I think Dean Henderson should get the nod next year. And I think on a personal level for him, it'll be interesting to see where he's playing next year because, and again, Roy Keane's kind of outburst during the broadcast was quite infamous. But it'll be really interesting to see what Ole Gunnar Solskjaer does about David De Gea and Henderson, because kind of on my reckoning at the moment, Henderson is probably the better goalkeeper.
Yeah, as you say, obviously these are all looking a year in advance, so we can't say what's going to happen next season. But yeah, Dean Henderson for me is obviously the one I pick, and I think he probably should actually take that Man United started spot next season anyway. But I actually don't think a year at Sheffield United again would do him any disservice, just purely because obviously they could have European football, so that could bring him up to a level where we need him next season. But yeah, as I said, I think Nick Pope would be my backup keeper as well. I think he's done well this season, obviously at Burnley. But my thing with Pickford is he's just so irrational, and I just don't see him as the keeper that England obviously need for next season. If we're looking towards obviously the back four, if we're going for a 4-3-3 formation, which we normally play, who would we be picking as our four starting defenders?
So I would go, I think right back's a really obvious choice. I think that's got to be Trent Alexander-Arnold. After that, it gets quite tricky. I think left back, I'd go Ben Chilwell. I'm really unhappy that Dan has made me go first for this, considering I haven't made any notes. In terms of central defenders, I think the obvious choice the player that will start regardless is Harry Maguire. He's going to be in the team. Whether that's a right or wrong decision kind of remains to be seen, but I think Harry Maguire will be playing. And then I think the last spot is where it gets interesting, because John Stones, I think if you were to pick the team reputationally, I think John Stones would be the obvious choice, and I think is the player that probably has the most quality. And I think at the World Cup he played really, really well, especially in that back three. I wouldn't mind seeing John Stones in there, but he's not playing enough for Manchester City. So on current form, and I think this is probably a slightly rogue shout, but I'm going to go with it anyway. I'm going to go for Tomori from Chelsea.
I think that is a rogue shout. He's someone I have noted down if we're picking a 23-man squad. But I just think Tomori, once again, I don't know if Chelsea's defence is the most resolute, and I'm not sure he'd be my choice. Someone I obviously would throw in there is Joe Gomez. I think Joe Gomez has probably been one of the standout England players, let alone defenders, this season in the Premier League. But obviously that could just be me talking from a Liverpool place. Dan, is there anybody you would take that last spot, or would you dispute any of Luke's choices for the rest of them?
Oh, no, I mean, I agree with the other three choices. The only person I would throw into the mix would be Tyrone Mings. I think in sort of a struggling Aston Villa side, he's performed exceptionally well. So it will be interesting to see whether he's still at Villa next year or whether he does move on to somewhere else. But I do think that he's sort of very thoroughly deserved to be sort of thrown into the mix for that starting spot.
Yeah. And then kind of just looking at right back a little bit more, obviously we would say Trent Alexander-Arnold should have that spot held down, but there's a lot of talent in the right back position for England. Obviously we've got Kyle Walker, but you've also got Aaron Wan-Bissaka as well. So who would we be taking as like backups to that spot? Because obviously for me, I think Wan-Bissaka should be the backup right back, but I see a lot of people actually disagree with that and don't think he should be going at all.
No, see, I do like Wan-Bissaka. The only thing I would say, he would be my backup as well. The only thing I would say is that I like Kyle Walker sort of in that back three where he was playing. So I think if we was going to sort of switch between a back four and a back three, I think maybe Kyle Walker might be the smarter choice, as he has sort of proven to be able to play at both right and centre back. But if we're basing this that we are going to be using a four back, I think it's got to be Aaron Wan-Bissaka.
I think in terms of the pecking order now at right back, I think, and when you talk about with the future in mind, I think it has to be Trent Alexander-Arnold is first choice, Bissaka is second choice, and then Kyle Walker is third choice for me simply because of his age. But I'd have all three in the squad simply because Walker can play in central defence. Trent Alexander-Arnold could play in midfield. He can play kind of defensive midfield. Very, very versatile player. And Saka is very, very good defensively. So if we do play a back four, which I personally don't think we should, kind of looking at previous results for England, if we did play a back four, I would probably, in the games against teams where we're playing against high caliber opponents, if we're playing against the likes of France, I'd probably have Wan-Bissaka in over Trent Alexander-Arnold because he is better defensively.
Yeah, I do actually agree with that. I think obviously Trent Alexander-Arnold can exploit weaker teams, but it's once again going back to kind of the system. Obviously Trent Alexander-Arnold thrives on being a fullback that's allowed to push forward and basically act as the main playmaker in Liverpool system, which I don't think he would be given a license to in England's side. If we move on to midfield and we're talking about versatility, the first person I actually put on this team sheet in midfield was Declan Rice, and I think that will be a bit of a rogue shout. I know he doesn't get as much love, and I think that's unfair because I think Declan Rice is a superb player, but I think Declan Rice as a holding centre mid playing in the defensive role could give next person on my team sheet is Jordan Henderson. I think he can give him the license to thrive in the role that Henderson has recently for Liverpool and allowing Trent and Henderson to link up on the right-hand side like they do consistently for Liverpool. Would you pick anybody else in them first two positions for central midfield, or is that kind of what you'd be going for as well?
I'd go with Rice and Henderson as well. I think Henderson's been brilliant this season. And Declan Rice, for all of the stick he gets online, I think people really misunderstand what Declan Rice's role in, especially West Ham's team, but also in England's team is as well. He's not there to make 40-yard passes. He's not there to dribble past people. He's not there to score goals. He's literally there to break play, to play as the anchor man in front of a back four. So a lot of the criticism is like, well, Declan Rice doesn't provide anything offensively. He only passes sideways. I'd dispute both of those things anyway. I think he's got a really good passing range, and I think kind of he is dangerous on set pieces as well, especially if he's playing in central midfield and you've got two extra defenders. But yeah, I definitely have Declan Rice kind of as the holding player in a midfield three. Henderson, again, I think is one of the first names on the team sheet. And then the third choice is quite tricky because you've got a number of players who could kind of make the cut. And I think by the time we get there this time next season, simply because I don't think he'll be playing for the same club, but I think Jack Grealish will probably be the first choice as kind of the number 10 for England.
Yeah, Dan, who would you pick as that number 10 role?
Number 10, I mean, for me, it was between Jack Grealish and James Maddison. But on my sheet, I have got Jack Grealish written down. I just believe that if he's performing as well as he is in a struggling Villa side, I do expect him to move away from Villa this summer. So it will be interesting to see how he performs in a better side. I mean, he could easily be in pretty much any top six side. So he would be my sort of starter at number 10.
Yeah, I think Grealish is a really interesting player to look at because I think the problem I think Southgate will have with him is that this England team seems to be very straight-laced, and he doesn't like to have so-called bad eggs in his side. So Grealish could be perceived in the same way John Joe Shelby was a few years ago, that he wouldn't want to take him purely because of what he could bring off the pitch, all the controversy that could surround him. But for me, I've gone with James Maddison. I just prefer James Maddison as a player. I think the set pieces that Maddison can take can really bring something to the side as well. Obviously, we've got a lot of good options for set piece takers anyway, but I just would prefer James Maddison in that side to Jack Grealish, but that's just my opinion. And then if we move on to the front three, I think this is where England's team is obviously the most exciting prospects. Obviously, we've got abundance of talent, both on the wings and in the striking role. Is there anybody here that you would go, they 100% should have a spot in that team, or do you think it could be rotated quite nicely as well?
The thing is, I think we've got a lot of talent going forward. I feel like the starting three for most people is pretty much set at sort of Sterling, Kane, and I personally would go Jadon Sancho. I think Jadon Sancho's got to be a starter in that side. There's also a shout for Marcus Rashford to be up there as well. I mean, the fact that Rashford isn't starting for England sort of shows that we do have a lot of talent going forward. I personally would trade out Kane for Rashford in certain games. I don't think Kane offers everything that we need when we are going up against sort of teams that we need to break down with pace. I do feel like Rashford would be the better starter there. I just can't see it personally happening. I can't see Southgate dropping Harry Kane as long as he's fit. It'll be interesting to see sort of how the next season pans out on whether sort of anyone does take over that role. I mean, I'd love to see Jamie Vardy come back and sort of come back into international football. But I think we're pretty sure that's not going to happen.
I agree. I think the front three, as you say, is obvious in terms of what will happen. I don't necessarily agree with it, though. I think the starting three, if they're all fit, would be Kane, Sterling and Sancho. For me personally, I would go Sterling, Rashford, Sancho. Just because I think if I look at the England team and you look at the way that it's probably going to be set up in this 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1, it just makes a lot of sense to have more pace so you can play off the counter-attack, because there's a lot of teams, and again, you look at the best teams in international football. France, for a lot of for the World Cup in Russia in 2018, they played a lot of counter-attacking football. All of the best teams recently in kind of international football have played counter-attacking football. You look at Wales when they got to the semi-finals of the European Championships in France. They played counter-attacking football. So I think if you have a front three of Sterling, Rashford and Sancho, not only do they have a lot of pace and a lot of skill and they're technically really gifted, you have players that can also break the lines, which I think is really important. And again, you could bring Kane on and preserve his legs and make sure that he doesn't pick up any injuries. And then you could bring him on for the second half and it changes the dynamic again. But for me, I would personally go Rashford, Sterling and Sancho. The only complication with that is, of course, it depends where Rashford is playing. Because if he isn't starting up front for Manchester United, it's difficult to put him in as a centre forward for England. In my perspective, it's where he should play for England. I just think otherwise we're not going to get the best of Rashford because we're just kind of stick him outside as a secondary option to someone like Sterling, and I think is too good to sit on the bench.
Yeah, I think I actually 100% agree with that. Obviously, I don't think we are going to leave Kane out of that starting 11. Obviously, he was a top scorer in the World Cup, and he just seems to be England's golden boy at the moment. So I find it hard that we would leave him out of the starting 11. But for me, yeah, I would agree. I would start Rashford up front, and I think that's his best operating role, both for club and country. Just going to, before we move on to the wider tournament, I just want to throw a few names out there that I've kind of got noted down as slightly left field picks, but obviously anything can happen next season. So I've got Mason Greenwood noted down. I've got Danny Ings noted down. And I've got Bukayo Saka noted down. And I've got Dele Alli too. Any of them four at the moment, would you give them a place on the plane?
For me, I feel like we've got to see how Saka sort of progresses over the next year. I personally would take him, but that's a bit of a bias for you being an Arsenal fan. But I feel like he provides so much versatility and he can perform well at left back, on both wings. And as we see on Saturday, he can also operate sort of on that left side of centre midfield in a 4-3-3. So I think he would sort of be my sort of rogue shout to get on the plane and get out there. I do think that he's the player that we sort of need to take a gamble on. And I think he'll provide a lot to the England side.
Yeah, it's interesting you say about his versatility, because that's kind of why I picked him. I know he doesn't particularly want to play left back, but our spot for left back, we've obviously got Ben Chilwell. But the only other player I can really think of is Danny Rose or maybe Luke Shaw, but neither of them are exciting or actually probably even good enough to play for England anymore. Whereas I think this England team is good enough, and obviously there's a lot of youngsters which Southgate wants to bring through. I think Bukayo Saka could be a really good backup for that left back position. Obviously, Luke, if you're looking at Saka or any of the other names I'll put out there, is there anything that you have to add on that?
In terms of those names, the one I would just have a categorical no to at this point is Dele Alli. I think he's been really bad recently. I don't think he's not delivering on his potential, because for so long people spoke about Dele Alli, and myself included, spoke about Ali as the future of English football, spoke about him as being the player that would build around, spoke about him in the kind of the same terms and the same level of importance as someone like kind of Gascoigne was for England. And it's just not really happened for him. And going forwards, it will be interesting with Tottenham to see if he does nail down the spot in the team, because if Mourinho goes to this 4-2-3-1 that he kind of won things with Inter Milan, with Chelsea, so on and so forth, I think Ali could be a good player for Mourinho as that hard-working number 10 who kind of sits back into the deeper block when required, but also kind of has the ability to be a presence off of second balls, and especially playing behind Harry Kane. Based on this season, I wouldn't take Dele Alli in the squad. Your other shout was Danny Ings, who I rate. I think is a really good player. And when you look at the other players, so the current England squad in terms of the last set of internationals, which was a while ago, but I'll read out the strikers that are listed on the England website. So you have Harry Kane, Jadon Sancho, Raheem Sterling, Callum Wilson, Marcus Rashford, Tammy Abraham, and Callum Hudson-Odoi. Would I pick Danny Ings? And I think this is the bar in terms of strikers. Would I pick Danny Ings over Callum Wilson quite comfortably at this point? To be honest, I don't think Callum Wilson is going to be in a place next year where he's in the conversation for the England team. So yeah, I think he does stand a really interesting chance. But again, I think he's the kind of player that would be put in the squad and not really see much of the pitch. So whether it's worth taking the younger player could kind of be an option too.
Yeah, I agree. I think Ings does create a new dynamic if you put him in that England squad. But yeah, I don't actually think he'd get much game time. So yeah, there's definitely an argument that we should take a younger player to give him the full international tournament experience. If we leave England aside for 1 minute and take a look at the wider picture, obviously, if we take a look at the groups, we've got some really exciting groups within this. So Group A, we've got Turkey, Italy, Wales, and Switzerland. Group B, we've got Denmark, Finland, Belgium, and Russia. In Group C, we have Holland, Ukraine, Austria, and then the winner of the playoff D. Then this is our group. So we've got in Group D, we've got England and Croatia, obviously the replay of the 2018 World Cup semi-final. We've got the winner of playoff Group C, and we've got the Czech Republic. In Group E, we've got Spain, Sweden, Poland, and winner of the playoff B. And then F, which is such an exciting group. It's obviously the group of death. We've got playoff winner of A. Then we've got Portugal, the current European champions, France, the current world champions, and Germany. What out of them, obviously, I think F will be the main answer. Are there any other groups in that really pick your fancy for that?
Not really, if I'm being totally honest. You look at Group A and there's some really quite average teams in there, and even Italy aren't. I don't think Italy will steamroll any of those teams, to be honest. I think all of them are of quite a similar quality, although Italy should finish top of the group. Group B, I'm quite intrigued just to watch Finland versus Denmark. I think that could be quite fun. But again, kind of Belgium and Russia should win that group. Group C, Netherlands have by far the best team in there. And then I think England's group is quite interesting if you look at it, because obviously we've got Croatia, who are a really good team, the Czech Republic, who have quite a few really decent players, got a good goalkeeper in Yuri Pavlenka. Obviously Thomas Tuchel's in the team as well. So Czech Republic are quite interesting. And if you look at the team that will be added to the group, it's the winner of the playoff C, which is going to be one of Scotland, which would be interesting for obvious reasons. Israel, again, not a team that frequently appears at tournaments. And then the two best teams, in my opinion, in the qualifiers, you've got Norway versus Serbia. And I don't know whether this is just pessimism or speaks more generally to just being an England fan in general, but I don't think that England will walk through this group particularly comfortably. I think it will be a couple of really tough games against Croatia and the Czech Republic.
Yeah, what you say about the Czech Republic is really interesting. One of the questions I'm actually going to pose to you in a minute is who you think your surprise package or surprise team for the tournament will be. And I've actually got noted down, I think Czech Republic could be that surprise team. I'm really impressed by Patrick Schick, obviously links up with Timo Werner in Germany. And I think Czech Republic could actually pose a lot of problems to both Croatia and England. But yeah, if we're going to throw that question out there, are there any teams in the tournament that you think will be the surprise package?
Personally, for me, I do. I know this is sort of a bit of an odd shout, but I think Turkey they're a pretty good side. I mean, you got Demiral, who's sort of the star centre back, and he's one to watch for Juventus, and I can see them sort of building up a good team here. I mean, I know you got Tosun as sort of their main striker, which isn't always great, seeing as he wasn't a huge player for Everton, but he seems to perform for Turkey at international level. And I do think, given where they're at, I think they could be sort of a surprise package. Maybe not to win it, but I think they'll shock a lot of teams.
Yeah, Luke, is there anybody that you would pick out from the teams already qualified?
For me, the team that I always quite enjoy watching as well is Denmark. They've got a few really kind of interesting choices to make. So Martin Braithwaite, of course, currently playing for Barcelona. Could be interesting to see what he's up to. Christian Eriksen, a player who's clearly got lots and lots of talent. Kasper Schmeichel always turns up big in international tournaments. And then you've got other players too, like Yusuf Poulsen, who hasn't had the best of time in the Bundesliga this year, but he's talented nonetheless. Nikolai Jorgensen, Thomas Delaney, Andreas Christensen as well is a really interesting player, and a player who is also interesting as well, people like Robert Skov and Kasper Dolberg. So yeah, I think Denmark are a team that always punch above their weight when they qualify for tournaments. So they're the team for me that could be the surprise package.
Yeah, I really actually do agree with Denmark's selection. It was between them and the Czech Republic for me. I think Denmark's squad is extremely strong. Just to chuck out two more questions before we wrap up this podcast. Firstly, who do we think are going to be crowned champions of Europe this time around? And then if we're looking at who we think will be the most underwhelming team, who will probably have who will be maybe a favourite but don't actually perform as well as we think they will. If I start, for me, I don't think anyone's going to beat France. I think France's squad is too strong, and I think Mbappe will just tear up the whole tournament, to be honest. And then once again, I think the most underwhelming team for me, once again, I think it will be Germany. And I think Germany had a really bad World Cup. But if we look back over really the past 2 years, they haven't had many great performances. I think they've beat the Netherlands in a quite last-ditch attempt. But yeah, Germany seem to have fallen off the pace a little bit. And I don't know if that's because Joachim Löw has been there for a really long period of time now, and it seems to have kind of got a little bit stagnant for Germany. But yeah, they're the team I would pick as maybe being my pick for the most underwhelming. But if we throw this out to you two, who would you pick for your winners and most underwhelming team?
I'll start with underwhelming. I think the team that I never enjoy watching, and I think will really struggle next year, especially with the fact that it has been postponed, are Portugal. I don't think they'll finish in the top two of their group. I think France and Germany are better teams. And by the time that Euro 2020 comes around, of course, they're keeping the branding. I think Cristiano Ronaldo will be at a time in his career where it's going to be a bit of an ask to expect him to finish off this Serie A season with lots and lots of fixtures, have quite a short summer, have to compete in the Champions League, and then have, again, a condensed season next year, and then expect him to be gallivanting around Europe to play in the European Championships. So I worry a little bit about Portugal. In terms of the team that I think will win the tournament, France is the obvious choice. I won't go with them, but I would say a team that I'm quite looking forward to seeing is Belgium. It will be a huge tournament for Roberto Martinez as their manager, because if he can lead Belgium to the title that many people expect them to be able to win, it will A, be a massive achievement in Belgian football, and B, finally deliver something internationally for a set of players that have so much talent. So they've got the likes of Hazard, Courtois, so on and so forth, Kevin De Bruyne. So yeah, Belgium could be dangerous. But yeah, I do worry about Portugal, and I worry a little bit about Spain, because a lot of the time as well, they come up against teams, and in their group they've got Sweden, Poland, and one of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Northern Ireland, Slovakia, or the Republic of Ireland. Spain are always a team that either are brilliant or pretty bad. So especially with kind of the chopping and changing they've been having managerially, that will be something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, something really interesting with Spain is that in their attacking options, obviously a few years ago, they had an abundance of strikers. More recently, their main striking threat is Diego Costa, who obviously will be getting on a bit next year and isn't the greatest striker in the world anymore. So yeah, Spain do worry me a little bit, because I can't think of many people that can lead that front line for them. Dan, if we're going to throw it over to you, who would you pick for your winners and most underwhelming?
Yeah, I mean, I had my sort of two choices for winners written down, and I actually did write France or Belgium. I can really see them just having too much for the teams in their own groups, and sort of on their road to the finals. They're two very exciting teams, especially with France. I just can't see anyone challenging France at all. They're too good a team. They've got too much depth. I really do think that it's going to be France's year again. And sort of the most underwhelming, I've got to agree with Callum and go with Germany. I can see France and Portugal progressing out of that group. Germany, they've just not cut it in the past few years, and I can see that sort of slump continuing.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think Portugal, once again, I think they'll surprise people. Obviously, I think this will be one of Ronaldo's last international tournaments. So I don't think he'll want to go out on a whim. But I think we can all safely say that, well, obviously, we were looking forward to Euro 2020 this year. But I think given the year break, I think we'll be even more excited when it comes around next year. I think that just about wraps up this episode of the Pre-Match Pint podcast. Obviously, you can find all of our socials and the podcast socials in the description. Make sure you hit subscribe on Spotify, and if you're watching us on YouTube, also subscribe to the channel to make sure that you don't miss any episodes. And we shall see you again next week.